How's it going there, YouTube? Thought I'd throw in a video today about how I prepare for days on the shooting range. And so we'll be looking at a few of those preparations. We're out in the garage today and it's cold. It's getting close to winter time, probably close to freezing outside, and it's around 40 in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is light up my big buddy heater. So down here we have a 20-pound propane tank, and it's fairly full. And I have the Mr. Heater attachment that can run from that to the big buddy heater, so I don't have to use the 1-pound propane tanks. So what I'm going to do first is turn this on. There we have it, 20-pound propane tank, Mr. Heater adapter, and it's got about a 12-foot long hose that goes from the tank to the heater. So we'll take a look at the heater next. Alright, there's Mr. Heater, and it's all hooked up to that propane tank. So we're going to go ahead and start it here. Hold that down for a minute to prime the pilot light. Piezoelectric starter. And there we have, oops, didn't get it warm enough. There we have the pilot light going, and we'll twist it back a little bit and turn it on high. That gets both burners going. And we also have a powered electric fan in there. And turn the fan on. Now that we're all nice and warm, have a couple of things we need to do, and that is separate all these brass out. I have a soup can here, I'm going to put them in that. So these are all spent 380 ACP. These here are once fired, the others have been fired several times. So we have probably around 50 in there. So what we're going to do with the brass is put it in a tumbler and make it all nice and shiny and pretty and get it ready for reloading. So here we have a tumbler by Cabelas, I believe it is. So we'll take off the top knob, and it's filled with walnut shell media. It's been treated with a brass polishing compound. And inside of there I have a number of 30-06 and 30-30 Winchester brass that's empty for ballast, because I very seldom have enough brass to fill that thing up. So we'll turn it on first. Switch on the floor here. And you can see some of the brass coming up there. Coming around, that's the ballast. And I'm going to pour the 380 brass from the can. About 50 rounds of 380 brass, so that'll take about 2 hours, maybe. This is a lot quieter with the top on it. So we'll see how much more quiet this is. It doesn't have so much of that rattling sound to it. So we're going to let those go for about an hour, or 2 hours maybe, and then we'll come back and strain them out of the tumbling media and go to the next step. Alright, that's been probably long enough. We'll take a look at those cartridge casings and see how they came out. Flip the magic switch. And we'll remove the top. And this is how we separate the tumbling media from the brass. We have just a plastic bucket, and this is a sifter, kind of looks like a gold pan. And just pour this out. Shake it around. And bingo, look at all the gold we panned out of there. Just remove the ballast rifle cartridges. Without these, it would take much longer to polish the relatively small complement of 380 brass because they just don't have enough other material to rub up against, I guess, to get the polishing compound to work. So I leave these rifle casings in there to accomplish that. Gives them something to bump up against while they're in the tumbling media. And I'll take a quick inspection here, make sure I haven't included other calibers accidentally. Sometimes I'll pick up a 9mm cartridge case, for example, and mix it in, but those are pretty much all 380s. What I like to do next is put the empty cases in a loading block, so that's what this is. And it's a piece of wood, 3/4 of an inch probably, drilled out with 50 holes. The holes will accommodate cartridge cases with rims up to the size of 45 long Colt. So what I do with 380s, I put them in with the heads up, the head stamp up. It makes it easier to grab a hold of them when it comes time to load them. It's easier to grab the rim of the case, even though they are a rimless case, I guess, or semi-rimmed anyway. Looks like we might have a 9mm mixed in there. Nope. See, it's a little harder to get that one out because I put it in. Much easier to grab them that way. I've had this particular loading block for at least 35 years. 34 years anyway. Looks like I bought it in 1983, I think. I don't think I'm going to come out with a full 50 rounds. Maybe 40, maybe 43, 45, something like that. There's 45, so it looks like 47. But I have some other empty 380 brass around to make it 50 even, which I like to load in multiples of 50 if I can, because that's how many fit into one of these boxes, which I'm kind of fond of. You can see it's got 50 holes in it. And on the top I usually put the loading data. This particular box used to have some 9mm in it. It doesn't really matter. Here's another kind right here. A little hard to open it. Pretty stiff hinge on that. But anyway, it also has room for 50. So it's kind of a traditional cartridge case complement is 50 rounds. Some of the more specialized self-defense ammo these days comes in boxes of 20, but we're kind of conventional here. We load boxes of 50. So we'll proceed to the next step. So after we've separated the brass from the polishing media, set that aside and return the polishing media back to the tumbler like so. And I like to give it a little assistance to get settled. And there we have everything back the way it was. Next we need to select a powder to charge the cartridges with. And what I like for this particular caliber and bullet weight is Winchester WSF ball powder. It's primarily a shot shell powder, but it works really good for handgun loads in the moderate power category. 380, 38 Special, 45 Colt. They all can realize a fairly good result with WSF powder. So that's what we're going to use. And then of course we need some primers. And what I've selected today would be Winchester primers. They're made for small pistol magnum loads, but they work fine in the 380. The powder charge I'm going to use, they give reliable ignition, and as far as I've been able to tell, they don't increase the pressure beyond its nominal working pressure for that cartridge. So we'll use Winchester primers. And next we need a bullet. So I like to use these. This happens to be XTreme bullets. They're made for the 380 auto. 100 grains. They're a fully plated round nose bullet. And look how shiny and sparkly they are. Oh my goodness. There was 500 of them in this box when I bought it, but I have used several. I think I loaded 200 of them, so there's 3 left in there. Today we're going to load an additional 50. But they're fully plated. They're a very nice looking bullet. So that takes care of the projectile. So there's the powder measure and hopper. So we're going to transfer the powder from the canister into the powder measure. It's not a full pound, probably only 4 ounces of powder in there maybe. But that's way more than enough to load 50 rounds of 380. And they only take 4.1 grains per cartridge. Well, I haven't touched the measurement on the powder measure in terms of throw weight for powder since I last used it to load this exact same cartridge with the exact same powder charge. So what I'm going to do disconnect it from the press. And I'm going to settle the powder by tapping it like this. And then I'm going to throw about 4 charges into this empty 44 Magnum cartridge case. And we'll repeat that process a couple of times. And that should do it. I've checked it a number of times on the scale, and it throws exactly 4.1 grains time after time. So I don't need to worry about that. Now I'll reconnect the charge lever rod to the powder measure. And there we have it. Now it's time to load the primer feed tube, and we'll get after that in just a minute. Alright. Say hello to my little friend, the primer flipper tray. This side is smooth, this side has ridges all the way around it, kind of like a phonograph record. Anybody remembers what those are? And what happens is we'll put the primers on there and shake it, it'll flip them all till they're anvil side up. And we'll put the lid on, flip the whole thing over until they're flat side up, and then I'll pick them up in the primer feeder tube and we'll go for noise. So, again, the Winchester primers, we're going to dispense out 50 of them, so that's 5 rows of 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put them in the flipper tray. And then all you have to do is kind of shake it gently back and forth. And the primers want to flip over when they encounter the ridges. There, they're all flipped. They were. Anvil side up. There. All anvil side up. So, put the lid on, turn it over, and there they're all flat side up, which is the way we want to pick them up with the primer flip or primer feed tube. And that would be this one. A small primer pickup tube. And we have a follower that goes in there. So what we're going to do is just go around and pick these up, press down on the top of the primer. The tube has some cuts in it that maintain some spring tension on there so the primers don't come out. There's a cotter pin on this end so they don't come out the back side until we want them to. So we're just going to pick up these 50. This tube holds about 60 if you press your luck with it, but it's meant for 50, and that's how many we're going to put in there. Have another size of primer pickup tube that holds 100, so if I'm loading 100 rounds I would use that one. That way I don't have to change tubes in the middle of the process. And one got away, but I straightened it out. And there's 50. Turn it upside down. Use the follower to push them past the constriction point right there. So now they're all down in here in a line. I put that in point first. There's a reason for that. When we put it on the machine, we will remove the cotter pin and the primers will fall where they're supposed to go. And we'll show that next. Alright, here we are at the press. This is an RCBS rock chucker press with a Piggyback II, I believe it is, conversion. 5 stations, we're only using 4 of them. So this is the decapping and sizing station. These are carbide dies, so we don't need any case lube. That is the expander and primer seating station. Then it skips one, then it goes to the powder dispensing station, and then next to the bullet seating station, and that accomplishes the loading cycle. Once we've pulled the handle 5 times, we start getting, on the 5th pull, we start getting a loaded round every time we pull it. So, primer feeder tube goes right there, and we'll pull the cotter pin out, put the follower in, point side down, and we're ready to rock and roll. So we'll go and get started. Put an empty brass in the 5-station shell holder. You want to check the tension on the screws, it's good. And pull the handle. That decaps and sizes that round. This picks up a primer from the tube, transfers it to a ram underneath, and seats the primer right there. And you can probably see, now we have a fresh primer in that case. Oops. Dropped something. Okay, so we'll do that again. Now for this stage, notice that I don't know what this is called officially, but what it does is it goes from this position to that position and causes this bar to raise the powder measure rotor up and get a charge of powder, and then when the ram comes back up, it dispenses powder right here into the case. We don't want it to do that on this next throw because there's no case there yet. So what I'm going to do is hold this over here. Now that back case is rotated into position to accept a powder charge on the next pull of the lever. I might zoom in on that a little bit. There's the tool head right there, you can kind of see it. And we'll do that for this next pull. So, raise the ram, powder charge is dispensed, empty case rotates into the position where a bullet will be added. So I'll take one, set it on there, up we go. And we now have a loaded round of 380 right there, first one. And we'll continue that process until we have loaded the entire box. Goes pretty fast once everything's all set up. You can load a full box of 50 rounds in about 10 minutes at a nice leisurely pace. What I like to do is when the completed round of ammunition is rotating around to the starting point, put my thumb right there to keep it from falling off, because sometimes they do just from vibration of the tool. So that keeps them from falling and hitting the floor, which doesn't really hurt the ammunition any, except sometimes it'll make a little dent in the bullet, which could affect accuracy, I suppose, if we were going to shoot it out of a target accurized firearm, but we're not going to. Every once in a while I like to check and make sure that the powder measure is dispensing powder. So I'm going to do that right now. Remove that round and look in there, and there appears to be an appropriate charge of powder. You may not be able to see it. Yeah, there we go. Powder down in there. Looks about right. also like to check this tension on this screw here from time to time. It holds the powder measure in place. That tends to wander a little bit with use of the tool and vibration. Though we're not speeding along here by any means, but we're still getting a good rate of production just from being leisurely and careful. And you can see we've already loaded 10 rounds. So we'll give it a pause for a moment and we'll get back to you shortly. One thing I wanted to mention here is the feel of the tool itself. After you've used it for a while and gotten used to it, you can feel when the primer is seated properly. And that comes on the return stroke. In other words, when the ram lever is returned back to its resting position. Okay, so now the casing is turned to the priming station and we can feel the primer being inserted into the primer cup, and you can tell when it reaches the end of that stroke, and there we have a fully seated and properly seated primer. It's not only important that it goes into its cup correctly and straight, it's also important that it's fully seated so that it's just below flush with the case rim or case head. And with use, and getting used to how the tool handles and how it feels when you're operating it, you can tell when the primer is being properly seated. You can also tell on occasion the decapping station doesn't perform its job properly. And off to the left of the main press we have this other one. This is a Hornady Press, and in it we have a universal decapping die. So if this tool doesn't decap the case, I can tell when I get to the priming station. I just remove it from the holder, put it over here, and decap it, then return it to the process that way. So it's all about feel. When you're using this particular progressive press. There are presses around, like Dillon makes, for example, where you can load 400 or 500 rounds an hour, maybe more. And there are even some automated ones that cost in the thousands of dollars if you're a high production reloader and shooter. But I like the ability to take my time and be careful, but still not spend an hour making a box of ammo. And I'm just going to go down to the shooting range and shoot at bullseyes. So that's a little bit about how to tell what's going on with the press by how it feels while you're using it. I mentioned earlier how the powder measure dispenses a known weight or volume and weight of smokeless powder into each cartridge case. And that's determined by setting it up and trial weighing and adjusting the volume delivered until you get the desired weight. So how I check that is on this little digital scale. I turn it on by pushing this button in the middle. It's supposed to let it warm up for a little while. It's warmed up now for about 5 minutes. Let's see that the readout registers 00. I'm going to put the pan on there and then tare it. And what we do is put a check weight on there, and it should show 500 grains or thereabouts. Now let's just try it and see what happens. It's tared to 0. 4.1, so that's the grain side, and that's exactly the powder charge that we're looking for, is 4.1. I can probably read it there anyway, 4.1. It shows that we're right on track with our 4.1 charge weight, and I thought it would be because the powder measure in this particular setup holds its settings very nicely, and I don't ever have to worry about them coming out of adjustment, but every once in a while I'll check it just to be sure. So now I've returned that charged case to the press. Anyway, we verified our charge weight, 4.1 grains of powder per cartridge, and that's looking good. Okay, let's continue. Finish off this box of ammunition. So far we haven't had any failures of the decapping pin to extract the fired primer. I haven't had to use the auxiliary press for that purpose yet. We've got 35 loaded rounds so far, and at this leisurely pace it'll just take maybe 3 or 4 more minutes to finish the box. So far there have been no mishaps of any kind. There usually aren't. Occasionally something will come loose or get out of alignment. It just takes a minute to fix it. But that doesn't happen very often once the press is set up for any particular caliber that you want to load. You can load on this press anything up to and including 300 Winchester Magnum. There we go. That time we didn't get a decapping. So we'll remove that. You can see there's still a fired primer in there. So we'll put it in the auxiliary press, decap it. And that happens sometimes. I haven't been able to identify any particular brand that doesn't like to be decapped. This happens occasionally. I think what happens is the decapping pin sticks in the anvil of the fired primer, and so when the ram is raised back up again, it just reseats the fired primer. It doesn't happen very often. Once or twice in 50 rounds would be an exceptional number. It often will go several boxes without that happening, and then all of a sudden we get one. That's why I say it's important to get attuned to how the press feels when you're operating it, so you don't end up with a fully charged round of ammunition that has a fired primer in it, because then it'll be a dud, and it kind of takes a little bit of the enjoyment out of shooting when you have to stop and clear a, not really a squib round, but a dud. No matter how many times you fire it, it's not going to go off because it has a dead primer in it. So we've reached the point where we have 4 more rounds of ammunition to be loaded, and they're on the turret right now. So what's going to happen the next time I pull the lever down is that little follower is going to drop through here, and this will stay to the rear to demonstrate that there are no more primers left in that tube. So here we go. There it is. It's a visual indication that we've used the last primer in the tube. And so all that remains is just to load these 4 remaining. Seating the bullet is actually quite easy. The hardest part, the one that takes the most pressure, is actually seating the next live primer. Now what's happened here is this has gone back into the position where the it won't raise the lever on the powder measure or dispense a charge. And what I have to do is move that flange out a little bit so that it will. That way my last round, my 50th round, has received the powder charge. And now we'll put the bullet on it, seat that, and we have 50 rounds of ammunition ready to go to the range. I also like to label the ammunition that I've loaded so that I know what the ingredients are. So I've made a little label on this box that we just loaded here. 380 ACP, 4.1 grains of WSF over, or under rather, a 100 grain plated round nose flat point bullet. That gives me an idea of what to expect out of that load. That is a standard power load according to my best research. Not a hot load, it's not a low power load, it's just a standard 380 load. Now it's time to clean up, put things back. So here we have our empty powder bottle. And here's a little funnel device that goes on top of there. And what I'm going to do is remove the powder measure and hopper from the tool head. And we'll remove the top of that and funnel the unused powder back into its original container. It's fairly important to keep powders in the container that they belong in, or at least one that's labeled so you know what's in it. Because some powders look the same as others. This particular WSF is quite similar to 231, also made by Winchester, and a couple of other powders. So unless you know what you're working with, you can be in for quite a surprise if you load a powder that you think is one thing and it turns out to be another, and you shoot that. The best thing that can happen is you have a round of ammunition that doesn't perform the way you thought it would. And the worst thing that can happen is you could explode your gun. Put for example, a powder that's too fast burning into a round of ammunition that's made for a slower burning shell, or powder made for a slower burning powder. Example of that might be 44 Magnum. You want to put H110 in it, and you accidentally put 231 in there, the same volume of 231, 14 or 15 grains, let's say, same weight, charge weight. 14 or 15 grains might be a low charge weight for the 44 Magnum, but 14 or 15 grains of 231 in a 44 Magnum shell will probably blow the gun up. So it's real important to know which powder you're working with for sure. So returning it to its original container after you're done using it is a really good idea, and that's what we always do. One thing I didn't address is what happens to the primer when it gets removed at this station right here. So there's a tube down here, you can probably see it, and where that leads is down to this little bottle. And there's a number of primers in there. I'm going to dump them out here in a minute and demonstrate for you where they go from there. So there's a empty Pepsi Max bottle full of, it's not full of Pepsi Max, it's full of spent primers. I've been dumping them in here for a couple of years. So here I've removed that bottle that you saw at the hanging off by a tube from the tool, the reloading press, and I'm going to dump them into here. There's a certain amount of ash that comes along with them. Put that back on there. Now I don't know how many primers are in here, but I would say there's 6,000 or 7,000. But as I say, I've been collecting them in there for a couple of years, maybe 3 years. I do a fair amount of target shooting. So that's what happens to the primers. Oh, that pretty much covers it. We've loaded up a box of ammunition and we're going to go to the range in a little while and shoot it. One thing I didn't mention was another safety precaution we take around here. So we're using highly flammable materials, that being the smokeless powder primarily, but also the primers. And we try to keep those things separated from sparks and proximity to heat sources, even though there's a gas furnace running in here and also the big buddy heater that I showed you earlier. But those are separated from the flammable materials by a considerable distance, and also by me because I sit between the heater and the press. But we do keep a fire extinguisher in here, and this would be sufficient to knock down any flame that might get started. Also, the powder measure on the press itself has a lid on it, which keeps any errant sparks or static out of it. In 33 years, I've never had any problem with the powder column and the measure catching fire, ever. I did have a different priming system before I got the progressive tool head, and it was Lee Auto Prime. And every once in a while, if you're not paying attention to those, you can get a situation where one of the primers gets caught behind another one and you force it up in there and it goes off. Had that happen one time. There weren't very many primers in the tray when it happened. There were a few, and they all went off at once and detonated and blew the lid off of that device. However, that was all that happened. There was no damage to the device, and I was wearing safety glasses and the whole thing. So sometimes unforeseen problems can pop up, but generally speaking, if you're slow and careful and pay attention to what you're doing, things generally turn out well, and you get useful ammunition that's good for plinking or whatever the purpose is, hunting, target shooting, whatever. So there's a little background on safety, and we'll see you at the range.